keep moving forward. You see the Lord coming, moving, progressing, advancing towards eternal glory. In those final days, the Bible paints a picture on his white charger there, and the bit in the other corner, I will come to that. Just leave that sat there. But the heading is keep moving forward. And of course, Christine has read to us Exodus 14, 10, 18. The message this morning is somewhat like many of the messages of recent time, and some that lay in front of us is intended for a different time. We are in a different time, a very unusual time. Have you ever seen a time like it? And we're going to be emerging into a brave new world. I'm going to offer up a very real and very sincere opportunity to anyone who wants to come up to the microphone here and define for us what that brave new world will look like. Anybody? Because I do not have a clue. Neither did the early church, and they were doing the same. I've been saying this over a period, and we're trying to prepare ourselves and go forward with that, looking at biblical principles, lessons to be learned from the Lord, etc. So I'm going to ask you all now. Close your eyes, don't close your eyes, do whatever helps you. But cast your minds back 30, 40, 50, not minutes ago, years, if you can. Who laughed? Think of the church that you were sitting in. Think of the church that you attended, the church that you were a part of. Did it resemble anything like the church that you love today? Ken David and I recently, the elders in the church here, had a conversation, and we all agreed today's church was very unlike the church that we grew up in. I remember in my last church, I was only there, I think, about 3-4 weeks, and Angie and I were out shopping somewhere, and I received a phone call. The church had been due to host a training day for deacons and elders. It was about 3 or 4 days before it, and I got this phone call asking if I would replace one of the speakers who had taken unwell. So I thought this was quite exciting in a sense, and said, "Oh, absolutely, of course. What would you like me to speak about? What's the subject?" And then my little heart sank. Change in the church. I thought, 4 weeks into it, you really want me to stand in front of a new church and talk about that? Come on. But the talk was quite simple, really. And it consisted initially of questions. If you imagine you were the deacons and elders from all over Scotland in that denomination gathered on the day, and I stood here, what version of the Bible did you use in church as you were growing up? You were all going to answer the same. Yes, it was the King James Authorized Version, and that was that. My next question was, what version do you use in your church and in your daily lives now? And apart from a couple of people over here, I think you will all say something different, because I know that they did. My next question was, as you were growing up in your younger days, were there women? Whoa! Were there women who were deacons in your church? Perhaps elders, women speakers and preachers in your church? And I think you all know that the answer is no. Did you have any other musical instruments other than the organ in your church when you were growing up? And you all know what the answer was to that also. Many other questions were asked, could be asked, and were shared and discussed and invited from the floor, etc. But my final opening question was a little bit naughty, and it was this. Who changed all of these things then? From a time when it would have been unthinkable for the leaders, the ministers, the pastors of that day to have all of this now. Who changed it? Because it wasn't me. It was you. It's a little bit naughty. Doesn't mean it wasn't true. Trailblazers. That's what you were. That's what you are. Every generation has left their mark. Every generation has made their mark. Too many have then fought against the next generation as they attempt to do the same. And you know it because people fought against you. The problem is that as human beings, we become comfortable in our own little bubbles and our own little ways, and we're so sure that because the things that we instituted and changed worked, then they're clearly universal and eternal. And we forget why we needed to change them. The old saying is true, everybody wants to change the world, but nobody wants to change. Unless, of course, it's our changes, then that's somewhat different. In our passage today, we see the people of God, the Israelites, being rescued by God. Now, they were in a very bad situation. I'm not comparing our situation. We're going to look at the passage and the principles of it. They had prayed out to God. They had cried out to God to come and rescue them, to release them from their circumstance and deliver them to a place of freedom where they could flourish. And don't we all want that? Doesn't the church constantly throughout the ages want that? God, of course, does that very thing, and he prepares them for the journey to the promised land. Now, of course, we know that it was a journey that they could never have dreamed of. They could never have predicted what lay ahead. But it was filled with tests of their faith and their trust in God, and we see it instantly as they cross the sea, as they enter into the other side of the sea, and they get to Mara, and then they move on into the wilderness journey, and we see it, and we see it, and we see it. We see them rise up in celebration. They cross the sea and they literally have a party. We see them behave like spoiled children, throwing their toys out of the pram, tantrums because they're not getting what they want or what they think. They react in incredible ways all throughout the journey. They reject their leader. One minute he's up here and the next minute, well, not so much. They reject God in the very same way. They change their minds more than the 4 seasons of weather you get in one day in Scotland. We watch them filled with awe, conviction, crossing the sea, celebrating, then complaining and wanting to return to the situation that they wanted to be free of. We watch them approach the mount with awe. They literally hear God. And yet, what does Moses find when he comes back down? How would you have felt if you had been Moses? The time and the energy it took to climb that mountain, to face God, and then carry those tablets of stone back down the mountain again to find that. But even before all of that, we see it in our passage this morning. Here are the first few verses, 10, 11, and 12. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified, cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." What a stupid, incredibly immature attitude to have displayed. The statement was completely bereft of any kind of trust in God, who had already achieved the impossible during the famine granted, which was centuries before this, but they never forgot it. appointing Joseph as the prime minister as he took care of them, bringing Moses back to the land, however unlikely a man he may have been, to have watched him debate with Pharaoh and all the wise people of Egypt, delivering the plagues upon them, and quite literally setting them free from the captors who had them in their grasp for 4 centuries with no sign of hope, and here they are. First sign of a challenge. First sign of a test. Making such a stupid statement. Well, at least we understood our circumstances in Egypt. At least we knew what we were dealing with and what we were doing and how we could cope with it. That was their thinking. Moses, under their guidance, was leading them into tomorrow. The tomorrow they had been crying out for. They didn't know what that meant, so they would rather die. A slower death in their comfort zone. Well, Jonathan Dunning and I, we go for a walk once a month, and we've spoken about this. I've spoken to a couple of churches I've had the connections with in the past, and they genuinely and sincerely fear that they won't survive the pandemic. And Jonathan Dunning and I feel worried for a lot of churches that will be the case. They won't be ready. But back to these people here, wanting to die their slow death, as a lot of churches will, have done and will again. What happened to these people and their excitement? Where is their trust in the same God who had did all of these things, the plagues, etc., the miracles that they had saw, how quickly they have forgotten? What hope are they giving to their children, the generations that are to follow? If they want to just stand there sulking. Were they really saying? Did they really believe that God was leading them out into the desert to die? Is that really what they thought of God? I don't think it was. But yet, how things can do this to you. Of course, we know that they did indeed die. They did miss the promised land. Because of that attitude, not because of God. I'm not saying that they didn't make it to the eternal promised land, none of them. That's between them and their Lord. But they did not see all that God had promised them and had in wait for them here and now. Every step of the way, they cried, yes, no. I ask you, if you had been there when Moses appeared back in the land, if you had been there at the shore of that sea, having seen all of those miracles and plagues, if you had been there journeying through the wilderness and saw the manna from heaven and all the countless other things, hearing God right there in the mountain before you, at any point, could you have foreseen the glorious things that the Lord was about to do next? No. We can understand their fear, of course, in one thing. We can understand it maybe in 2 things. Maybe even a 3rd time, but over and over and over again. How quickly they forgot. How quickly they fell back to their own understanding and serving their own minds when things got a little bit scary. Tomorrow is scary, my friends. Of course it is. It's unknown. But God is not the unknown. He hasn't changed his mind or his ways. Not one tiny little bit. So cast your mind back again. Let's go to the 70s. Anybody remember the 70s? Put your hands up. Put your hands up. Do you remember the 70s? Did you wear flares? Richard can't contain himself. He wishes he was wearing them again. So back in the 70s, I don't remember it. Sitting in your church, living your life, whatever you were a part of, the whole scope of your life, all of those tomorrows ahead of you, almost 50 years worth. What was the Lord about to do? as you sat there. Think of the families you've raised. Think of the things you've seen in life. Think of the ups and downs of the journey. Think of the days when this church here was about to become this church. I can only imagine the sacrifice of you people, the uncertainty that you faced, the fear that must have brought, the courage and the boldness required. And here we are. Cast your mind back again to the 70s. Let's pick out 73, 1973. Apparently, that was a good year. Now, as you're pondering 1973 and everything else that's going on, meanwhile, elsewhere, there's a very unlikely little boy being born who will one day stand here and ask you these very questions in a strange Glaswegian accent. 1973. Now, who saw that coming back then? Any of you? Neither did I, but then I was just being born. Who knows what he is doing about all of our tomorrows that lay before us now? But he hasn't changed. Do we want to question him? Do we want to react like those tantrum-throwing Israelites? Or do we want to keep moving in full trust and conviction, just as you have did throughout even the 4 decades of this church? Even everything you've moved past, come across, carried, been through. Think of the journey of Jesus. Kneeling in the garden crying, "Take it away from me." But he showed a conviction and a trust that those in the desert did not have. They were always looking back, and look what they missed. But Jesus never stopped moving forward. Safety of the upper room to the garden, from the garden to the arrest, from the arrest to the trial, from the trial to Pilate, from Pilate picking up a cross past the floggings and everything that went from that to the crucifixion site, up into the cross. He trusted in his tomorrow because he trusted in his God, and he walked from the tomb and he met with the disciples and he moved to glory. The early church walked through so many things and kept going forward, past every fear, past every doubt, not knowing what the next day held. How could Peter have thought in that prison that an angel was about to come and open the gates and he would walk straight back out? But everything they went through gave us our today and the excitement of tomorrow. How could they do it? Because they were full of faith. They were full of trust in the Lord. They had the Holy Spirit leading them and filling them with power, wisdom, peace, joy of the King of Kings. They had what you saw on the screen, the bit that I haven't touched on. The old saying goes of some people, "Oh, that man, he's as tough as nails, that one." Our Saviour was and is tougher than nails. And he just kept going forward. The passage says, Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm. You will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only be still." There is a time to be still. There is a time to know that he is God. They had done that. They had knew who he was. They had considered all of these things. They had seen. They were sure of where they were going or what was happening. That certainly that they were in God's hands and he was leading them. Certainly until the moment of complete trust was required. The Lord was bringing them the deliverance the passage speaks of. And we do always need to be ready to stand firm in our faith that the passage speaks of. This is true, but here is God's response to being still. Because the problem with being still for too long and too often is that you're too ready to glance back and miss what's ahead. So here is the Lord's response as we come towards our conclusion. And the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Stop your whinging. Tell the Israelites to move on. I've already shown you who I am, what I can do, what I will do, and indeed what I am doing. Move on." And so Moses took action. The waters were divided, and we know what follows. Is there anything that the Lord cannot do? Do you believe He is the same today, and that He has our tomorrow already waiting for us? Is there anything that the Lord cannot do? I'm going to say yes. He cannot use you, me, us, if we're too busy sitting about whinging and looking back the way and not ready to move. He cannot deliver us into tomorrow if we're not ready to keep moving forward in the same faith that built this very church and brought us to this very day. The Lord our God is great indeed. Jesus is King of the universe, and He lives. He lives. Christ Jesus lives today, walks and talks with us. God sent His Son, and they called Him Jesus. And because He lives, I can face tomorrow. We must take His hand, keep moving forward in His triumphal procession. Has God's tomorrows ever been worse than yesterday's and today's? Could we have imagined our today's and everything that He has done? Then we need to be ready to take His hand and keep moving forward, because He is God and He is great. Thank you for bearing with me and listening. Follow that passage through later on and have a look at it and see what He does. Tremendous. I'm sure you know.